Live from the Red Keep, we're going to talk historical fiction versus world building. Getting right into it, I'll posit that historical fiction may not only be the hardest genre to write, but it's also the most thankless. And why is that? World building may be hard, but it's also fun. It can even be addictive. Ever heard of world builder's disease? There's no antidote, but that's what appendices are for. World building can be so addictive that some writers get caught up in it and they do almost no writing. Historical fiction writers have to do prolonged, meticulous research, and that can be fun. What a dork. Enjoyable or not, both historical research and world building are difficult, but it's harder still to introduce these worlds to the audience without bogging down the story. That's right, the author is excited about this material, or else why bother writing about it, or they're enthralled by this world they've created. They're bursting with all this information, so they'll be tempted to infodump. They'll launch into this long dissertation about facts, events, and places, but the reader won't care. He'll get bored and impatient, close the book, and put it down. When we say book and reader, we also mean TV show and audience. Thank you for the needless clarification. It's a vicious circle. You have to get the story moving and interest the reader in the characters, and to do this, the characters have to interact with a strange, unfamiliar setting. You need to impart just as much information as the story needs to move forward, but because everything is brand new, you have to keep the things from moving too fast. You have to set the scene. People read The Lands of Ice and Fire because they're invested in Arya and Tyrion and want to learn about their world. Fine, world building's hard, but isn't like George Lucas and George R.R. Martin aren't well compensated. Yes, but the writer of historical fiction faces the same challenge. That world isn't the author's creation, but it's so removed in time and place, it can be just as unfamiliar. It's exactly the same conundrum. And in fantasy, you just have to be consistent, while in historical fiction, you have to be consistent and accurate to what really happened. Nitpicking pedants go on IMDb forums and screech about how these first cousins were really second cousins, or moan about tiny mistakes in chronology. No one should ever venture into IMDb forums. It's like Thunderdome in there. Yes, it's Troll City, but the fantasy writer does have to abide by the details of his own setting. A writer should be able to keep the details of his own world consistent. It's almost impossible to keep track of every little detail in a world as huge and intricate as Westeros, especially over a span of decades. The fantasy writer has the enormous advantage of choosing the attributes of that world. We were just recently talking about Cromwell and the New Model Army, and it struck me that it would be almost impossible to write a popular TV show about the English Civil War. Not even Michael Hirst could do it. There's no TNA. In the Tudors, he could work with all the wives of Henry VIII. The English Civil War may have been one of the dowdiest periods in history, but that's not what I meant. Nearly every player was a rabid theologian, and that fanaticism was the mainspring of all their actions, and it makes them unrelatable and unlikable. They slaughtered each other over prayer books, altar railings, and stained glass. That's why Michael Hirst switched to Vikings. Not much theology there. Vikings didn't cudgel their brains over Thor and Odin, whether the son was of one substance with the Father, whether he proceeded from the Father, whether he was an emanation or a manifestation of the Father. None of that. I think a series about the early church fathers might be very interesting. I'm going to get in on this before Simon jumps on you. I don't think theologies, church councils, and acrimony will draw many viewers. Barney is such a wiener. You know what period would make a great historical series? I suppose I have to. What historical period is that? The Napoleonic Wars. It had a wider conflict and deeper cleavage. I suppose if you can talk Mr. Hirst into it, he'll give you a producer credit. And on that elevating note, we're going to wrap this up.